we found amazing archaeological objects.
And the implications are enormous for archaeology. It's going to be truly revolutionary.
For years, the Terracotta Army stood as a silent marvel. Thousands of warriors and horses frozen in clay, guarding China's first emperor. But now archaeologists have turned attention to the strange seals embedded on several of the horses' bodies.
520 life-sized horses. I mean, we're at the center, at the heart of this unbelievable World Heritage Site, which is, in a lot of ways, the symbol of my own cultural heritage, my ancestry.
The markings were not decorative. They were deliberate, uniform, and deeply unsettling. What do the seals mean? Why were they hidden? Experts are saying the reasons are terrifying. If that is true, then everything we thought we knew about China's first emperor and why he built this army might be completely wrong. Forged for eternity. The terracotta horses in Emperor Qin Shi Huang's tomb are not just art. They are tools of control. Built with exact shapes and little variation, these life-sized clay animals were not created to impress. They were made to show power. They were part of a planned empire for the afterlife, one designed by a ruler who cared only about control, strict order, and lasting rule. Each horse was hollow, but still heavy. This made it easier to build many of them while keeping their size. Their bodies were shaped with big muscles, stiff legs, wide nostrils, and large open eyes. The nostrils were actually drilled open to make it seem like the horses were breathing. These horses were not designed to look graceful. They were meant to look alert and ready for action. The heads and bodies were made separately, then attached together. This method allowed fast and repeated production, not uniqueness. It was a factory-like process. Workers followed strict orders and had to meet daily targets. The horses were made like war supplies, not sculptures. Archaeologists have found that many were set up with real chariot parts, including places to store weapons and bronze parts. There is nothing joyful in how they stand. Their necks stretch forward. Their mouths are slightly open, as if waiting to hear a command. Their legs are set firmly in place. Unlike the warriors, whose faces are a little different from one another, the horses all look the same. They were not seen as living beings. They were treated like equipment. These horses were built for Qin Shi Huang took power by defeating many enemy states. He forced everyone to follow one law, one money system, one writing style, and one set of weights. He had thousands of scholars buried alive. He burned books that challenged his rule. He didn't want just unity. He wanted total control. He ruled through fear, spying, and public punishments. The terracotta horses are a result of that system. They were not made out of care or spiritual respect. They were built to keep his army going, even after death. Their identical look shows a system that allowed no freedom or differences, not even for animals. They were placed into strict positions, locked into tight groups, and sealed into the emperor's underground army. This was not just a symbol, it was a government project, and it didn't stop with horses and warriors. Entire communities were forced to work on this project for years. Some who refused were killed. Some who helped build it were reportedly buried along with it. But even with all this planning and control, one thing didn't match. Some of the horses had strange inscriptions on their bodies. These seals were not found on any of the warriors, and that is where the real mystery begins. Seals on horses versus inscriptions on soldiers. When archaeologists began documenting the Terracotta Army, one detail immediately stood out. The warriors and the horses were not marked the same way. This difference, once considered minor, has become central to understanding how each figure was created and what role it was meant to serve. The contrast reveals two entirely different systems of classification, and it may also point to something far more disturbing. Most of the terracotta soldiers include visible inscriptions. These are not decorative. They are written records. Usually carved on the back of the torso or inside the leg, the inscriptions note the name of the artisan, the production unit, and sometimes the supervisor. In many cases, even the specific workshop location is recorded. These inscriptions act as quality control records. If something went wrong, authorities could trace the defect back to a specific person or team. It was a form of production transparency. Each soldier's body carried the bureaucratic fingerprint of its maker. However, the horses are different. Most bear no workshop name. There are no names of artisans. Instead, they are marked with compact stamps, often burned or carved into hidden areas like under the belly, inside the jaw, or on the underside of the hooves. These are not written in the same style as the soldiers' inscriptions. They are seals, compact, often symbolic, and sometimes deeply encoded. Many take the form of number clusters, such as 38, 50, or 66. Some horses have only one. Others bear multiple overlapping seals. Some have none at all. Before these seals were recently decoded, no one knew for certain what these horse seals meant. But several things were clear for some time. First, they were not applied by the same teams who labeled the soldiers. The style, method, and placement are completely different. Second, the placement suggests concealment. While soldier inscriptions are easy to see, the horse seals are hidden from normal view. That may indicate they were not intended for public inspection, but for internal use, either administrative or ritual. This difference raised questions about how labor was divided. Were the artisans who marked the horses part of a different workforce? Did they have a different role or lower status? Or were they working under different instructions, perhaps related to ritual protocols or military logistics? Some researchers propose that the horse markers may have been prisoners, conscripts, or individuals tasked with a lower caste form of production. The lack of attribution could reflect erasure. These laborers were not meant to be remembered. The presence of multiple seals on some horses also led to theories about classification. According to historians, the seals could indicate processing stages, ritual status, or transport units. But without written explanations, they remained cryptic. What is certain is that the horses were tracked, controlled, and categorized through a system separate from the soldiers. That system was hidden, numeric, and far more unsettling. To make sense of these coded marks, scholars and later forensic teams initially began comparing them with seal patterns from other Qin-era sites, including grave goods, execution chambers, and military transport hubs. The connections they found changed everything. But the biggest breakthrough ever came when AI was brought in. Pattern or coincidence? Comparisons across Qin-era sites. At first glance, the sealed markings found on the terracotta horses seemed like a logical part of Qin Shi Huang's highly organized production system. Across his empire, compact stamps and symbols appear on almost everything produced under state control. Archaeologists have found markings on bricks used in imperial construction, on the sides of weapon molds, and even on mundane burial goods. These symbols were typically used to indicate batch numbers, production lines, or the identity of supervising officials. In many cases, they were straightforward. They helped track accountability, quality, and logistics across a massive state bureaucracy. This is not surprising for a ruler like Qin Shi Huang. His regime was built on total oversight. Every province, workshop, and military unit reported upward. Every project, including the massive Terracotta Army, was run like a military campaign. Thousands of artisans, potters, and metallurgists labored in state-run facilities that were expected to produce standardized, inspectable work. It made sense that seals would be used to track that output. But when researchers compared these marks across various Qin-era sites, something stood out. The terracotta horses did not match the pattern. Unlike bricks or swords, the horses carried markings in strange and inconsistent ways. Some bore overlapping seals, some had none at all. Many had stamps located in places that made no sense for production tracking. Seals were found under the jawline, inside the thighs, and deep along the underside. There are places that would be fully covered by clay once the figure was assembled. These were not visible surface stamps. They were hidden. This raised immediate questions. Why would production marks be placed where they would never be seen? What was the point of tracking something no official could access once the statue was complete? And more importantly, why did only the horses show this behavior? No terracotta soldier has been found with stamps buried in interior sections. The inscriptions on soldiers, names, workshops, foremen are generally visible and consistent. They follow a known administrative structure, but the horses broke from that entirely. Their seals were more frequent, more erratic, and far more concealed. This suggested something chilling. If the horses were not being stamped for standard oversight, then they were being marked for something else. The internal placement implies intention. Someone, somewhere in the process, was assigning these horses a different function, one hidden from surface view. If soldiers were the face of the emperor's eternal army, perhaps the horses served a more secret purpose. They were not just vehicles for transport. They may have carried something else, something meant to be controlled, classified, or bound. While these comparisons helped frame the scope of the mystery, they still offered no explanation for the deeper intent behind the seals. And soon, experts would use AI to decode these seals. The reveal left the team extremely stunned. But before that, disturbing theories about the meaning behind the seals began to emerge. Marks of the condemned? The deeper experts looked into the horse seals, the more disturbing the possibilities became. At first, many believed the markings were nothing unusual. Maybe they were just logistical tags to match each horse to a specific chariot or to indicate its place in a production line. That would have made sense in the context of Qin Shi Huang's massive infrastructure. But those explanations began to fall apart once the secretive placement of the seals was studied more closely. Some historians started comparing the seals to ancient branding practices. Under Qin law, criminals and prisoners were often branded with hot irons. Markings on the face or hands showed their status permanently. Slaves could be marked too, often to signal ownership or punishment. That kind of state violence was routine under Qin rule. The empire was built on control, fear, and permanent labels. Some experts began to ask, were the horses being treated the same way? One fringe theory went further. It claimed the horses were not just tools for transport. They were spiritual slaves. According to this view, the seals were not production tags. They were ritual brands. The placement under the jaw, the bridle, and the hooves echoed where animals or people might be marked to show submission or punishment. These seals could have symbolically bound the horses to the emperor's command, even in death. The theory argued that Qin Shi Huang did not want free spirits in his afterlife army. He wanted a hierarchy locked into place. Everything, even the animals, had to be labeled and controlled. These seals, then, were not harmless. They were symbols of total domination. The horses were not honored beasts. They were condemned ones bound to eternal service like spiritual prisoners. Some researchers even suggested the seals functioned like magical locks, keeping the souls of the beasts tied to the emperor's will forever. Others pushed back. They warned that there was no hard proof. No texts and official records confirmed this theory. These theories were dismissed by some and feared by others. They were unsettling, but without solid evidence, they remained speculation. That changed once artificial intelligence revealed what no eye ever could. Machines that see the invisible, AI, imaging, and seal revelation. The first major breakthrough came with the use of multi-layered spectral imaging. This technique involves scanning the surface of the object under different light wavelengths, from ultraviolet to infrared. It allows scientists to see through layers of pigment, clay, and grime. When applied to the horses, something completely unexpected happened. This method revealed faint impressions that had been almost completely erased. Seals that looked like faded bumps under normal light turned out to contain hidden patterns and symbols. In some cases, markings that were thought to be part of the clay texture were revealed as intentional, precise symbols that had been deliberately covered up. The fact that someone had tried to erase them was the first major red flag. Another breakthrough came from 3D microtopography. This tool creates extremely detailed maps of surface texture at a microscopic level. It allowed researchers to measure the depth and shape of every marking on the horses with incredible precision. The scan showed that some horses had original seals scratched out and new ones applied in slightly different locations. This meant that the horses had been reclassified or reassigned at some point after their creation. That was not normal production behavior. It looked like the horses had been reviewed, altered, and sorted according to a darker logic. The most disturbing finding came from chemical residue analysis. Beneath layers of hardened clay, researchers detected small amounts of cinnabar. Cinnabar is a red mineral that contains mercury and was commonly used in ancient Chinese rituals. It was not used for decoration. It was used in spiritual ceremonies and binding rites. Alongside cinnabar, scientists found traces of protein binders. These organic substances were used in ancient times to help ritual pigments adhere to surfaces during religious or magical practices. These materials had no place in simple factory markings. Their presence was a clear sign that something ritualistic, even sinister, had been done to these horses. This evidence suggested that the seals were not just stamps. They were part of a more complex process. Some horses were marked, then remarked. Some were treated with ritual pigments. Others had their seals hidden under additional layers of clay. The combination of advanced imaging and chemical analysis revealed a system that went beyond simple production. It showed signs of deliberate manipulation, revision, and possibly spiritual control. The deeper researchers looked, the more disturbing the pattern became. It began to look like these animals were not just constructed for war, but spiritually branded into servitude. What had once appeared to be small, unimportant stamps now looked like central elements in a larger and more disturbing system. These marks were not just records. They were warnings. They carried meanings that had been erased, altered, or hidden for reasons not yet fully understood. What began as archaeology had become a forensic investigation into an ancient regime that never stopped trying to control its subjects, even in death. But it was not only the discoveries that stunned researchers. It was what those discoveries implied about the emperor's underground empire that would shake our understanding of Qin history itself. Altered afterlife. Seals that were removed, rewritten, or hidden. When archaeologists looked deeper into the seals marked on the terracotta horses, they noticed something shocking. Many of the seals were not fixed or final. Dozens of horses showed clear signs that their seals had been erased, replaced, or altered during construction. This was not an accident. It was not rare. It was a repeated pattern, and it raised serious questions. The most basic question was why. If the seals were just production stamps, there would be no reason to erase or change them. Some researchers now strongly believe the horses were being reassigned. A horse originally marked for a high-ranking role might have been demoted to a lower task. Others may have been removed from chariot duty or stripped of their ceremonial placement. These changes did not look like part of a factory process. They looked like a correction or a punishment. Some experts think the edits might be tied to spiritual judgment. In Qin times, craftsmen and workers who failed or angered the state could face severe consequences. If a craftsman was punished or executed during construction, anything he had created might be considered spiritually contaminated. Horses marked by such workers might have had their seals erased and replaced to avoid curses or spiritual danger in the afterlife. There is another disturbing theory. During the later years of Qin Shi Huang's rule, the court was full of political purges. Ministers, generals, and even royal family members were removed or killed. Some scholars believe the changes on the horses might reflect this chaos. If a horse was linked to someone who fell from power, it may have been secretly reassigned or downgraded. That fear of spiritual contamination ran so deep that even statues had to be altered. Even more troubling were the seals that were deliberately hidden. Some were found inside the mouths of the horses. Others were placed under the lines where armor would cover them, or under saddle fittings. These marks were almost impossible to see once the horse was completed. This suggests the goal was not just to assign a role, but to conceal it. Someone wanted to override the original spiritual orders without leaving any visible trace. The timing of these changes was also important. Most of the tampering happened during the final stages of construction, just before the horses were buried. This was not part of the early production plan. It was a last-minute decision. According to historians, that means someone in the project was afraid of getting something wrong. They feared the consequences of sending the wrong horse, with the wrong markings, into the emperor's afterlife. It was advanced AI imaging and material scanning that revealed these changes in the first place. AI exposed the erasure layers, chemical residues, and inconsistencies that were invisible to the human eye. It traced where seals had been overwritten and guided researchers to the patterns that proved this was intentional. Once it showed the evidence, historians who studied the scans were certain these changes were not random. They were spiritual corrections made under pressure and secrecy. The terracotta horses were not just built, they were constantly rewritten to meet the emperor's terrifying standards, even in death. But the most horrifying part was not the editing. It was what researchers found when they looked at the material inside the seals themselves. That changed everything. Chemical traces of suffering. Once AI revealed the chemical composition inside the terracotta horse seals, historians began to analyze the data in full detail. Now they were no longer guessing. The AI findings made it clear what substances were used, where they were placed, and how often they appeared. Based on that, scholars could finally piece together what these seals were really for, and the conclusion was horrifying. The use of cinnabar and protein binders was not a mistake. These were not random materials. These substances had clear spiritual meaning in Qin burial rituals. Cinnabar was used in ceremonies meant to trap the soul, block rebirth, or tie a spirit to a specific task. Protein binders were used in religious paints to make spells and markings permanent. That combination had only one function: to create a binding seal with spiritual power. Historians now strongly believe that some of these horses were not meant for transport for the emperor's afterlife. They were spiritual containers. They carried cursed energy, failed creations, or condemned spirits. The placement of these seals, deep under armor or inside the mouth, made it impossible for anyone to see them after burial. This suggests the markings were not for living viewers. They were placed specifically for the world beyond. Some horses showed layers of ritual pigment applied multiple times. This was not decoration, this was a system. With the help of AI, experts are now certain that horses with more layers may have been seen as more dangerous or more spiritually contaminated. The more they were sealed, the more they were feared. The AI showed that one group of horses appeared to be labeled in stages, as if their roles were being updated after each spiritual decision or judgment. Historians believe these horses were marked for punishment, not honor. Some may have represented disloyal officers, failed servants, or cursed individuals symbolically tied to the emperor's wrath. These animals were not just included for realism. They were built to carry spiritual burdens into the next world. This new interpretation has changed how experts view the entire Terracotta Army. It was not just a military formation. It was a spiritual sorting system. Every seal was a judgment, every pigment was a warning, and every horse was classified based on how it would function after death. The AI made it possible to read what had been hidden, and what it means is terrifying. The emperor was not just preparing for power in the afterlife, he was managing punishment, exile, and spiritual warfare. Even in death, the system of control continued. Qin Shi Huang's afterlife vision. For centuries, historians believed the Terracotta Army and horses were built to protect China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, in the afterlife. But recent AI-assisted analysis of the inscriptions and placement patterns reveals something far more disturbing. Qin Shi Huang didn't just want to conquer death, he wanted to rule it. This wasn't about defense, legacy, or spiritual peace. It was about domination. The thousands of clay warriors, horses, chariots, and weapons weren't crafted to serve the emperor in rest. They were constructed to continue his regime. Down to the last detail, what he built underground was a perfect extension of his living empire, not just in structure, but in control. The seals decoded by AI proves that what once appeared to be simple signatures are actually bureaucratic commands. They include unit designations, reassignments, and corrections, which are orders frozen in clay. The positioning of every figure, the layers of cinnabar pigment, the erased inscriptions, and altered markings all confirm one thing. This wasn't an army. It was a system, a government of the dead. Qin Shi Huang ruled in life with absolute cruelty. He burned books, executed scholars, and erased anyone who questioned him. He unified China through fear, surveillance, and punishment. And now it's clear. He intended to bring that same system with him into death. The mausoleum is not a tomb. It's a prison. Not for him, but for everyone buried in it. This was not a resting place. It was a continuation of tyranny by other means. The horses were never meant to gallop, and the warriors were not built to fight. None of them were intended to move at all. They were deliberately positioned to remain frozen in strict formation forever, just as Qin Shi Huang's officials had been forced to operate in life. They worked under absolute control, with no room for disobedience, no tolerance for deviation, and no possibility of escape. If this interpretation holds true, the Terracotta Army is not a monument to greatness. It's a chilling message from a man who believed that the only perfect empire was one where no one could speak, think, or escape, not even in death. What do you think about the Terracotta horses? Feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Want more videos like this? Then subscribe to the channel for more eye-opening stories. Thank you so much for staying with us till the end. See you in the next video.